Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin C. Neese.
And I'm Mike Poteet, and you're listening to episode 55, That Which Survives. We'll start off with some Star Trek news, and then we'll talk about Star Trek Prodigy, Season 1, Episode 6, Kobayashi.
And then we'll get into our audience feedback section right after our main topic, That Which Survives. We're going to be talking about legacy characters in Star Trek, and the legacies we leave in our lives. It's going to be a great conversation. Stick around. Hey, this is crazy.
What's that?
The day is completely off. It's a new day. It's a new dawn.
We're giving a behind-the-scenes glimpse here. Yes.
Yeah.
We've switched recording days to Fridays. So
Friday nights, yeah.
And unlike some of the late-night talk shows where they joke about Friday audiences because they record their Friday shows on Thursday, we really are a Friday podcasting team anyway.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I tell you, the audience is way better.
Oh, I agree. We've got the best Friday audience.
Oh, man. How you doing, Mike?
I am doing okay. How are you?
I'm making it. I'm cold, but I'm all right.
Oh, well, yeah. We had our first measurable snowfall of the season today.
Oh, yeah?
In the wee hours into the morning. We got here at our house about 3 or 4 inches. So it wasn't too bad to shovel in the morning. I got done in relatively good time, but it was enough to have the schools delay and all that kind of fun winter stuff. So
yeah, I saw some photographs of somewhere up north of cars just kind of scattered like matchbox cars all over the highway, and I thought, yep.
Oh, well, that was earlier in the week, the nightmare of I-95. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Glad I wasn't in that, and certainly feel bad for the people who were. Nobody should have to endure 17 hours on I-95.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was more in the D.C. area, but yeah. So winter is here.
Winter's here, even in Texas. We're not snowing. It's not snowing yet, but it's winter. Good
Lord willing, you won't have a winter this year like you did last in Texas.
You know, that is, I would be okay with that. I think
That's right.
I think I could handle not having another winter.
Prayers
like
for
that.
a seasonable winter in Texas and
Thank
everywhere.
You. At least a strong power grid, if nothing else. Goodness gracious. Well, I think that we have some Star Trek news to get into. I think I'll lead us off because I think you've got the better one. So I'm just going to start with mine, which is from Star Trek Picard. And you'd think that Star Trek Picard news would be the good news, but it's not.
Right. Oh.
It's not good news. Star Trek Picard production has been halted.
Oh.
This is sounding familiar.
Yeah.
So
Deja vu all over again.
Yeah. So apparently there were several people on the crew who tested positive for COVID. And so, like, more than, like, not just several, like, more than 4 dozen, like,
Holy
a lot
cow.
of people.
That is a lot of people.
Yes. So there are more than, so there are, like, more than 450. Now, more than 450 staffers. Now, it was halted on Monday, but it's resumed. It was scheduled to resume today, Friday.
Okay.
So hopefully it's back underway as of today. So this might be old news, but
I hope so, and I hope everybody's healthy and that all those infections were of the mild variety, because I imagine
I hope so
all
too.
Those people have been vaccinated and boosted to be working on the show in the first place. So
right.
Oh, well, it's just another reminder that we're still not out of the woods with this thing.
Yeah, you're right. And, you know, the good news also is that Patrick is not one of the ones who got infected. So,
well, right, because I would think
nice.
he'd be at elevated risk compared to some other, even of his castmates, you know.
He would.
Yeah.
So I don't know what this is going to do to production, but the other part of the good part of the news is that they were into season 3.
Right, because season 2's in the can and premiering next month, right? So
that's right, as far as I know. Yeah. So that's good, and so hopefully it won't do too much. You know, we might end up, just might end up with 1 week without Star Trek.
I knew you would bring it back to scheduling our podcast. I knew it.
it affects us all.
It does. No, I agree.
But yeah, it does. Yeah.
Well, in the unlikely event we have a gap week down the road because of this, we'll have to see. We'll just
we will either have a special feature gap week episode, or we will be off that week. One of the two. Anyway. So
my Star Trek news is more pleasant than a COVID-related shutdown of production. I saw this piece in the New York Times Magazine, and to be honest with you and the listeners, I haven't read it all yet, but I'm very eager to, because it's about an exhibition at the Skirball Cultural Center on the Jewish roots of Star Trek. This is a Jewish cultural center that is usually devoted to explorations of Jewish life and history and tradition. But here they have a whole exhibition devoted to Star Trek.
Wow.
And, of course, if you know anything about the personal lives of the people involved in Star Trek, you won't be surprised that Leonard Nimoy is a primary focus of this exhibit. And it tells the story about how he invented the Vulcan salute out of the priestly blessing in the Orthodox Jewish tradition that he peeked at as a kid when he wasn't supposed to. That's talk about legacy, as we're going to. But it also talks with people like David Gerald, at least the article does, talking about how themes you can find in the Old Testament and the Talmud are present throughout Star Trek. Adam Nimoy is quoted as comparing Kirk's decision to spare the Gorn's life in Arena to Joseph's decision to spare his brothers when they come to him in Egypt, even though they sold him into slavery. He talks about mercy as a very Jewish theme that is seen throughout Star Trek. So, and even if you're not interested in the religious and philosophical themes, which I don't think anybody in our podcast audience would not be interested in, but even if you weren't, scrolling through this article for the pictures alone is worth it. I mean, they've got botleths, they've got phasers, they've got Star Trek II costumes, they've got Borg regeneration alcoves where you can have your picture taken in a Borg I would so do that. I would have my picture taken in a Borg regeneration alcove. So if you're in the New York area or can see your way clear to go safely, it looks like a fabulous exhibit, and I think it's wonderful that just as we here every week lift up what we see as Christian themes in Star Trek, people of other traditions do that as well. It's such a rich way to celebrate the show, to connect it to something that has that much meaning in your own life.
Yes, absolutely. And the connection to, I mean, also as from a Christian perspective, looking and seeing what connections there are between those Jewish themes and, Christian worldview as well,
right,
is very informative and helpful, because that's our roots. That's where we come from. And so
absolutely.
I think those are great people. And even when, other people of other faiths and other perspectives are not that closely connected to a Christian worldview, there's still so much to learn from the conversation. And I love that. It excites me to no end. We had a rabbi by the name of Jonathan Gershom who did a piece on growing up as a Star Trek fan in the 60s, which he wrote for my book Spockology, which you were a part of a few years back. And it's a great piece. And he did a book called Jewish Themes in Star Trek. So
I bet it's a great read.
Oh yeah, it's cool. So it's really cool to see that exhibit. Man, I really want to go to it. I wish I could. Except for the cold, I wish I could go to New York right now.
Right, and unfortunately, if you want to see it, you'll have to go in the cold, because the article says that space in spring will be devoted to an exhibit on Jewish delicatessens, which I think would also be pretty good and probably pretty tasty if they offer some samples, but it wouldn't be Star Trek. So,
Star Trek. No,
so now's the time to get to NYC to see this exhibit at the Skirball Cultural Center.
That's pretty cool. Yep, awesome. Well, speaking of the Vulcan salute.
Yes.
The Vulcan salute.
Nicely done, sir.
Shows up, and Spock himself and Leonard Nimoy show up in this week's episode of Star Trek Prodigy.
Yeah, if you told me that was going to happen, I would not have believed you.
Yeah, well, I was like, that's why I didn't want to say anything before you'd seen the episode, because I was like,
right, I appreciate that. Yeah,
on your own. Tell me what you thought about it.
Oh, I enjoyed the episode. I thought it was so much fun, and not just because it included appearances from Spock and Uhura and Dr. Crusher and Odo and Scotty by the time everything was over. I thought it was such a great way for Prodigy to dive into the lore of Star Trek. I mean, obviously it's set in the Star Trek universe, right? But the first 5 episodes have, and I think correctly, focused on introducing viewers or reintroducing viewers to that universe through new characters and not, I really don't think, relying too much on what's come before. I mean, yes, hologram Janeway's there, but you don't need to. My daughter hasn't seen Voyager yet. She wants to now because she liked hologram Janeway, but but she accepted, and you go along with it. And I think, frankly, I mean, I'd have to speak to someone who is in this category, but someone who's not seen Star Trek, I think they could still enjoy this episode. I mean, for one thing, characters like Spock and Scotty have percolated through the culture to a certain degree. Everybody knows, I cannot give it any more, Captain, that kind of thing. But you know, okay, well, Odo and Dr. Crusher and Uhura, I think people know Uhura too. But my point is just, on the one hand, it was diving deep into the lore to bring these characters into the show for this episode. But on the other hand, it was, again, like Prodigy is, just so accessible. And yes, they were sampling audio from old episodes and movies, with the exception of Dr. Crusher. Gates McFadden recorded new dialogue for this episode, but you don't have to know where all those are from. I mean, I did a lot of them. I won't say I knew all of them, but I recognized a lot of them because I have watched Star Trek that much all these years. But you don't need to know, and in fact, not knowing is probably better because you don't have to remember the original context and then focus on what's on your screen right that moment. It became a distraction at points to me, and that was just on me. I don't blame the show for that. That was just me thinking, oh yeah, that was that episode.
Right.
So I was going to say, it wasn't just great for all that, though. It was great because I think it really shows us some solid character growth in Dal that by the end of the episode, he's clearly traversed an arc from just thinking about himself to he verbalizes, I've got to put these other people's needs ahead of mine, at least some of the time, and he's thinking, and he's not, he's learned an important lesson of what it is to be a leader through these repeated, over 100 attempts to pass the Kobayashi Maru, which, it reminded us of the discussion we had where you raised the point about Boimler on Lower Decks and I Excretus repeating that Borg scenario so many times, and every time he saved more people, his score went up.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't quite the same with Dal and the Kobayashi Maru, but he kept wanting to, his first instinct was to turn around and run away, right? When Uhura tells him the Klingons are coming, I guess we better leave, and he fails. But and he never passes the test because it's the Kobayashi Maru, so nobody ever passes the test. But he comes, I think, closer than, Kirk cheated, right? So he really comes closer than any character we've seen because he's intent, and as Spock says, stubborn. Yes, on proving himself, but I think even without realizing it, which is the best kind of learning, he's learning through all these attempts, because at the very, very end, after he spectacularly fails by blowing up the Enterprise D, right, as he's just about solved it, Spock tells him, it kind of prompts him to speak for himself the truth of leadership that he's learned and the truth of putting others' needs before yourself and regarding the good of the many rather than the good of the one. So I've blathered on a lot here, but the answer to your question is I really liked the episode for lots of reasons.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, that's great. And I agree with you in that regard as far as, I've heard another commentator recently say, we're constantly going through this with Dal. We're constantly going through this. He starts out the episode all arrogant and then has to learn some humility by the end. And, I get that, but at the same time, it's like, that's how you learn something. You have to kind of butt your head up against that wall a few times. And each time he grows a little more and gets a little farther down the road. And,
Well, this really felt qualitatively different to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think so too. And because he actually said, that I'm not perfect, I'm afraid, and all that sort of stuff. Like, really actually admitting those things about himself instead of just sort of being able to get along, and keep his cool, but rely on other people, and do the right thing, but still kind of, play it off like, ha, hey, see, I did it. But, this required a lot more, I think, real humility, which I appreciated and I really liked. And I like that he sort of knocks himself down in his own way, like that. And that often happens, I think, in life, that you have to work through things. You know, you can't just learn a quick lesson here or learn a quick lesson there. You have to work through the lesson. You have to really work on it and learn it experientially, before you really know something.
And in doing that, you internalize it, which I think that's the point of these 100+ attempts. He's internalizing this lesson, without even really meaning to. He just wants to show Starfleet he doesn't need them, but by the end, he's internalized this truth about needing others and thinking of others. Yeah,
I think so, and I hope it serves as a real growth point for him. I mean, a genuine growth point where we start to actually see him become a better version of himself from here. Because I think now it's like, okay, I mean, it would have been easy in one of the previous episodes to do that, but this feels a lot more earned in that regard. So.
Yeah, earned is a good word, and they could have done it if they'd wanted to in 1 or 2 episodes early. They could have made it very quick and superficial. But like, I didn't even remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, which I could be. It's been known to happen. Did we know that Dal was the one who told them they had to go back to pick up Gwen in episode 5? As I remember, I didn't go back to watch episode 5 again, but as I remember, we were with Gwen in her point of view as she was being smothered by the tentacles of the living planet. And then we see the protostar show up to rescue her. So in this episode, at first, Dal passed it off as, oh yeah, hologram Janeway told us we had to. But by the end, it comes out that no, that was Dal's decision. That he told the others we're not leaving without Gwen. I think that was new information, and I really liked that they held it until this point, because I think it underscores that he is capable of growth. And I don't know, I just thought it was a nice kind of button to the episode.
I agree, and I think you're right about it being new information. That's the difficulty of having the seasons broken up like this.
That is true.
The one thing that's been troubling for me is, like, I understand there are practical concerns regarding Disco taking a break and all that, but it was very jarring for me. I had to remind myself several times, no, I'm not sitting down to watch Discovery. I'm sitting down to watch Prodigy. To the point that when I got to Paramount Plus and I'm logging in to watch the episode, I went, okay, click here. Oh, wait, no, not Disco, Prodigy. I mean, I was just like...
you were looking for episode 8 of Disco, or whatever episode we're on. Yeah,
I was, and so I was very much scrolled through season 4 of Disco before I was like, oh yeah, Prodigy. What's wrong with me? But I've mentioned before that, like, my impatience to get back to Discovery has been strong this year. So, that's just down to Disco being my favorite. But I did really like also, and this is the part that I wish had more of a payoff. I really liked the conversation between Zero and Gwen.
Yes, I liked that too.
And I liked Zero talking to her about language, and that it's not just translation, it's interpretation.
Yeah.
That's really important. And
yes.
I wish that had played some practical role in the episode. Like, apparently
it did.
But we don't really get to see how that works at all. We don't get to see it function. We just hear her repeat this line that her dad told her, and then all of a sudden everything's unlocked.
I don't believe she's repeating a line. I believe she's reading / interpreting the password that they need to get into that data.
Maybe. I don't know, but it happens to be the same thing that her father had said earlier in the episode. And I don't know if she was aware of that or not, but it was that.
Bad.
And so it sounds like something that might have been repeated to her. And so it felt like it was kind of her talking to herself, and maybe that was informing what she was doing. And maybe we'll get more information about that later on. It just felt really easy, and I wanted it to be more difficult. And I wanted it to, in Star Trek, we often have these kind of where an idea is teed up and then it pays off later on.
Yeah.
And I felt like that was too brief here, and we could have even gone another episode without having this stuff unlocked. I felt like it was too easy.
I think that's a fair critique. Yeah. And to be honest, even though it didn't bother me quite the same, I did kind of have to wonder how she was interpreting something, and that was the best. I'd forgotten that the line showed up earlier in the same episode, but I will say I did quite like that flashback.
I did too.
Not only does it actually give us our first concrete landmark for where Prodigy fits in the Star Trek timeline, but it introduces some interesting new information that Gwyn is basically a clone of her father. At least that's how I took it. So that's
right.
Not what I expected. And it introduces a new mystery about who is this order and why don't they want Solum to have offspring. So still not too much clarity, but a few steps more on that whole mystery being unraveled. And I found that pretty fascinating.
Well, yeah, and it also introduces the mystery of, like, is this some mad scientist solution to the problem, or is this how his species procreates? Does that mean their whole species is like manufactured or something? I mean, we have no idea.
Yeah, but I don't know.
That's the kind of that's one of those big mysteries we'll be teasing out for the rest of the season, I think.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that's exciting. Well,
did you they were talking about bringing back characters. What'd you think of the revelation that Chakotay was captain of the Protostar, at least at the time that it went down? Apparently,
that was pretty cool because we had known Chakotay was coming back, but we didn't know how.
Right.
And so it'll be really interesting to see if we're just watching video playback of Chakotay, or if we're going to find him at some point, or if there's hologram Chakotay is going to show up on the show, or what's going to happen.
I can't imagine they brought back Robert Beltran for one line of dialogue. So
right. And then made headlines about it,
Right. I suspect we'll, whether it's just, the ship's log footage, or whether I suspect we're going to see Chakotay in the flesh at some point.
Or maybe in flashbacks.
Yeah, maybe so.
It's going to be interesting, but it is cool to find out that connection. It's also weird that Chakotay has a hologram Janeway on his ship.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I was thinking about asking, how do you think he felt interacting with a hologram of his former commanding officer?
A former commanding officer and former potentially more than that. And I mean, in my head canon, he and Seven broke up about a week after they got back to Earth, and it was all Chakotay and Janeway after that. But that's just me.
Yes, I know you're very committed to that pairing.
To that
and I don't begrudge it to you, but I still think he was much more into her than she was into him.
That's possible. Well, see, but she thought she was still betrothed or whatever at the time.
Not after like season 2 or something.
No, it was later. Well, anyway.
Okay. Well, we're on a tangent.
But anyway, it's interesting to wonder how that came to be and what that relationship was like. That's really interesting.
Maybe he wanted a hologram Janeway.
Maybe he did. Maybe he did.
It was a reminder. Yes.
Yeah, it's like if I'm gonna have somebody to lean on,
That's right.
It's gonna be Kathy.
That's right.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
Yeah. No, I think it's exciting to see what we're going to be finding out very soon what happened to the Protostar. So.
Yeah. We'll see where that takes us. And of course, the biggest revelation of the entire episode, I think, is that Murph can belch a bomb and be okay.
Yeah, I wonder what the deal with Murph is, because they've teased that there's some deep connection to classic Star Trek there, and I still don't know what it is, but
yeah, I'm fascinated.
I can't remember offhand any alien that could swallow photon grenades and have it be no more than a explosive hiccup.
Right. That was very interesting. But it's cool. It's like apparently he's indestructible. It's like, wow, Murph just
Yeah,
cool.
right. Yeah, that'll probably come in handy.
Yeah,
at least
I would
once,
say so.
Probably many times during the run of the series.
Oh, the shields are failing. Murph, get out on the
Murph,
hull.
well, he could extend
Stretch
himself
yourself
over the
out.
whole ship, couldn't he?
And he'd be like,
I bet you're right. I bet you good Quatloos, you're right.
oh boy. Well, we shall see what happens with that. But I thought it was cool, and Murph is, of course, my son's favorite, so that was nice to see. When I first viewed this episode, I have to admit, I did not like it.
Oh, really?
At all. Did not like it.
Well, tell us some more about that.
Well, I mean, part of it was, me just like adjusting my brain to Prodigy being all revved up for Discovery. Part of it was that I just wasn't in the right mode to be able to like read the episode correctly because it moves at a different pace than Discovery and all that. And so it took me some getting into, but I had some other issues too. I feel like the reusing of the audio doesn't work all that well. It works in certain places, especially in those bits, early bits on the bridge. I think it works really great. The more they do it, the less it works. And by the time Spock is having that dialogue with Dal, it doesn't feel, because I can hear that it's audio from here and it's audio from there.
Absolutely.
Because the audio quality keeps shifting.
Yeah.
And because it's kind of nonsensical, it doesn't really connect. Like in the earlier stuff, it's very connective and just feels in the moment. But then at this point, it just feels like Spock's just sort of spouting things. It feels more like Dal is having a conversation less with a character and more with a Hallmark Christmas ornament. And it did not work for me at all. And then when he does the Live Long and Prosper, and it's clearly old Spock from 2009, I'm like, dude, there are young Spock versions of that. You don't have to go grab. I get the sentimentality, but it sounds terrible. And so for me, that scene did not connect. I knew what it was supposed to do. And then also that speech that they use about, you can't show that you're not perfect or you lose command. I hate that speech.
Yeah.
That's one of my least favorite speeches in Star Trek. I think it's wrong. I think it's completely incorrect. And it doesn't work.
I'll grant you the audio qualities didn't match perfectly. And that I noticed that, and it bothered me a smidge. But I think your point about the speech from the enemy within, I've never liked it either. But by putting it in this new context, I think we're asked whether they successfully did it or not. We could disagree, but I think what they're asking us to think is that hologram Spock is putting this out there as a challenge to what Dal thinks a captain is or is supposed to be, and hologram Spock is maybe even arguing with his real life younger self, about this, that, it worked for me in the scene better than it works in The Enemy Within, because it's like hologram Spock is giving voice to what Dal at this point thinks a captain is or should be, as I said. And by sort of throwing him at it so bluntly, it helps Dal in that process of realizing differently. I mean, that's how it worked for me. Yeah.
I get that Dal eventually says, well, I'm not perfect and all that. And he does know that, but I think the fact
it's like reverse psychology.
But it's still Spock stating a thing that as though it's true. And he does that in the episode too. And I think the fact that it digs back to something so memorable, and so many of the things that are so memorable that Spock says, for me, it's like it's so clearly reused audio that it doesn't feel real. Right. And so it didn't feel real to me. And then the whole episode just moved too quickly. There was too much crammed into one episode. It felt very fast paced, and like it didn't. I don't know. It just didn't feel good to me. The first time I felt better the second time. Part of that was that I couldn't get myself out of Discovery space.
Oh, so
And-
you've got different Treks competing for your affection. You
Well,
can't just
it
love
was
them
just-
all equally.
No, it's just that Prodigy moves along at a much quicker pace.
Well,
Quick,
yes, it does.
too quick for me in many respects,
Well,
but that's just an overall thing.
Well, fair
about the
enough.
series
I
that
mean,
doesn't work for me.
fair enough.
But anyway,
But I think it's got to move quicker than Discovery at some level. I mean, Discovery, each episode, I think, well, almost every episode moves along at a pretty good clip. We've had lots of talky episodes lately, but and that's okay because Star Trek discussion is important, and conversation and articulating our feelings and our thoughts is important. But Prodigy is pitched at a younger audience, and younger audiences today expect faster paced. And I don't know, it's interesting you say you felt there was too much in the episode. Maybe, because I was kind of surprised the flashback scene was so short myself. But I thought the fast pace and the amount of time spent with Dahl, I don't know how else you'd convey that he's done this 100 sometimes, and and it really, and the payoff I thought was so beautiful that he comes so close. He's saved the day, and then if he were just a little more careful and didn't sit down on the fire phaser button to destroy the Enterprise D, it was just such a perfect payoff. But this is part of the beauty of any entertainment. I mean, your mileage varies. So
well, no, I mean, I think the Dow story was probably better paced than anything else in the episode. And, even though parts of it were too fast. Like even when he says, I wish we could get off this bridge. Yeah. And Spock is just transporter active, just immediately. And he didn't even say where he wanted to beam to.
That's a good point.
I'm just like, dude, he should have said, I wish we could get on their bridge. I wish we could be on their ship or something like that. Or and then how does that even work in the scenario? Because aren't their shields up? And I mean, it just...
well, these are all... I mean, I'm not going to say these are bad points, but in the moment, they didn't occur to me, and I didn't, except for the audio one you mentioned. And I don't know. I just found it such a delightful take on the whole idea of the Kobayashi Maru.
Yeah, I like that element of it. I did like that element of it. Sure.
And I think every time we've seen the Kobayashi Maru in Star Trek, it's been the same but a little different. I mean, the original, the template in Star Trek 2, right? And then we see Star Trek 2009's version, which is hysterically funny and perfectly. I love it. I love that take on it too. Kirk crunching the apple in the center seat and everything. And I think Wesley's psych test is not the Kobayashi Maru, but it's a variation on the theme in that episode, Coming of Age in first season TNG. And now we've got this Kobayashi Maru where it's on a different Enterprise and you can mix and match your own crew, which what Star Trek fan wouldn't love to do that? So I mean, all your points are valid. They didn't detract for me, and that's that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. No, and even Odo says we've got 2 Klingon battlecruisers. There are 3 on the screen, and he
hadn't
says
one
2.
blown up at that point.
No, that was the first time the battlecruisers show up, and he says there's 2, and there are 3, and I'm like, you could just animate 2. Why did you put 3 on there when Odo said 2?
See,
stuff like that.
Go back and look because
stuff like that just kept happening. I'm like, this is the sloppiest episode. Drove me crazy. But anyway. And then Uhura doesn't hardly do anything, and Odo
That's
is like,
true.
Odo is like, I'm going to resign my commission. And I'm like, you didn't have to go that far just right then. Pick a different... Odo is obstinate a lot. Pick a different line, I don't know. It just was... I don't know.
But
it bothered
the
me.
second
and Beverly
viewing...
didn't look like Beverly. It just...
I did know... I was going to... I actually thought I need to mention this on the podcast. For all the great animation they do, I was surprised how little Beverly Crusher resembled Gates McFadden's likeness. Yeah.
Maybe a little more today, Maybe a little more how she looks now. But
I don't know. I mean, you wouldn't think they'd want to do that because they're obviously wanting to present her as she was at the height of TNG.
Right. So I didn't think it looked
well. I think these are again. Yes, I can't dispute many of these points, but the net where it got what it left us with just left me with such a good feeling.
Yeah. And that's great. I'm really glad that they did this in terms of like bringing it back to the original series and bringing Spock in. I mean, it's cool whenever a series. I think just about every series has brought Spock in at some point. Almost every.
I
series.
guess you're well.
I don't know.
Did Voyager have any Spock?
I don't know if Voyager or Deep Space Nine did.
Enterprise?
I can't recall off the top of my head.
Deep Space Nine had trials and tribulations, if nothing else.
Oh yeah, that's right. So Spock's in that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, of course.
But I don't know that Voyager or Enterprise.
I don't know if Voyager or Enterprise did, but
of course, T'Pol's very much in the Spock mold.
Right. I mean, Enterprise is kind of pre-Spock, and so you're not.
That's true. I guess he exists, have to go through lots of hoops to get Spock on Enterprise.
Yeah, right. But there's a lot of Vulcan stuff, so that leads back. We're talking about Idic and Vulcan Salute and all that stuff. It's always in there. As long as that's in there, that's bringing forth that character's legacy. And I liked that about this episode. I liked that there was a connection there, and it was really cool. I appreciated that aspect of it very much. And I mean that made me think about, and it's the conversation that we started having about this episode before we were getting going about legacy. These are what we call legacy characters.
Absolutely,
who came into this episode, and look at the people who are represented. We've got Leonard who we've lost.
Yeah.
We've got Jimmy Doohan, who we've lost.
Yeah.
We've got Rene Auberjonois, who we've lost.
Yeah.
We've got Nichelle, who has just recently retired from public appearances and all of that. The only person who's still, around, and active is Gates.
Yeah.
And it just got me thinking about not just these characters and the legacy they leave, but these people, these human beings.
Yes.
And I think we all love these characters, but each of these people who we've lost, each of these people who were featured in this episode, were also people who I think people have affection for as humans.
Yes.
We've met them and they've been around and they've engaged with fans and all of that. And we've seen them speak and appear at different places, and they've helped to carry the Star Trek legacy. And they've each left legacies of their own. We talked about Nichelle on this show, with NASA and Woman in Motion and all of that. But then, you also have the way that all of these people have cultivated their relationships with their fans.
Yeah.
And have been good custodians of Star Trek.
Yeah.
And
good stewards.
Yeah. And that just really struck me. That really interested me about the way we talk about, like Gene Roddenberry's legacy and the way we talk about the legacy that all these people leave in Star Trek, and how different legacies and residual impacts have been seen within the Star Trek universe of these various characters and various events. And then how that relates to our lives as well, and the way we live our lives. With a mind toward legacy, with an eye on legacy.
What a gift it must be. I mean, I remember watching For the Love of Spock, the documentary that Adam Nimoy did about his dad. And just, what a gift. It seemed like Leonard Nimoy genuinely felt it was to be able to play that character for decades. And with each passing year and decade to bring new nuances to the character of Spock and to create this iconic character who is recognizable beyond the boundaries of Star Trek fandom. I mean, people know the name Spock, and they might even recognize the Vulcan salute and, illogical captain. They'd know some catchphrases maybe. But, what a gift. And if we try to compare the legacies we might be able to leave with the legacy someone like Leonard Nimoy might leave, we might start going down a wrong path of really beating up on ourselves. But right. I think the point of comparison is we can all create at some level something of beauty like that. It won't be an iconic character in pop culture who's gone on for decades, but something that really attracts people and interests people, and at least I would like to think I'd like to think I could do that. Let's just say that, it's kind of a friendly challenge, maybe, like,
Yeah.
what can you produce that someone will remember? And again, I don't want this to sound like I don't know what the word. I don't want this to sound like a Kobayashi Maru scenario or
Right.
it's a test, but it's an invitation. I think that, look at how Leonard Nimoy and these other actors use their gifts and use their talents to create something of beauty, something that people delight in and enjoy. If you don't want to be so grandiose about it, maybe something that made people happy. What can we do with our gifts and talents that will make people happy, that people will enjoy, that will inspire people, or even just one person. I think that's something worth thinking about.
Yeah, it really is. And I think we see that, throughout Star Trek, we often see that inheritance and that legacy, and that people are carrying with them something that is larger than themselves.
Yeah.
And the influence that other people have on us. Even in the recent Advent episodes, I talked about the 2009 Star Trek film and George Kirk's act of love at the beginning of that film, and how Jim Kirk is aware of that event, but it's ended up with so many negative impacts in his life practically, that he doesn't see the real legacy of it,
Right, which Captain Pike does, right? Because Pike, doesn't he say he did his thesis on the Kelvin incident?
Yeah, and Pike says, there's something I admired about your dad. He didn't believe in a no-win scenario.
Right.
And Jim Kirk replies, he sure learned his lesson, didn't he?
Yeah.
And Pike says, well, it depends on how you define winning. You're here, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I think that has something to do with how we define legacy, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's one thing to think, like you said, we might not create a great, character in pop culture, that resonates with people for a long time. I was just thinking the other day that mathematically, I will probably live to see the 100th anniversary of Star Trek. And that's
boy. How many podcast episodes will that be from now?
They won't have podcasts anymore by that point.
We'll be
we'll download it into our brains.
That's right. That's right. But yes, I guess mathematically that is a real possibility.
It's a real possibility, and just to think about that, to wrap my head around, that I could be so, connected with, and to have been so affected by something like this, and that something that is, generally pop culture is thought of as so ephemeral, and yet I know that by the time Star Trek hits its 100th anniversary, people are still going to be talking about it.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
And so that's huge. And you think about things like that, and you think, well, yeah, you think of legacies. You think of, politicians trying to pass their legacy bills. And you think of people who have buildings named after them and all that sort of thing. And people have buildings named after them. That's not a bad thing. Many times this is a result of a lot of hard work, and those places that are named after people do wonderful things and give good into the world. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying these are big things.
Yeah.
And that and sometimes they're superficial. Sometimes it's more about lasting laudits than really lasting impact. And I think what we often lose, we've talked a little bit on the episode on the show recently. We've kind of been circling this idea of like sort of what happens after we die and all that sort of thing. And it's sort of been floating around in our heads a lot and in Star Trek a lot lately. And there's a lot of Star Trek that talks about that, the soul and whether it goes on after we die. We talk about Spock's katra and all that sort of thing. And we also talk about souls a lot in certainly in the evangelical tradition that I come from. But it's usually talking about saving them and winning them and all that sort of thing. And there's a lot of talk about salvation. But I think we do ourselves a disservice, and I think we do the gospel a disservice when we're always focused on that sort of eternal salvation, that sort of what happens after we die, salvation. That, you believe in Jesus so that you go to heaven when you die or whatever, But I think that's missing a big part, which is the salvation that happens now. And the rescue and the renewal that happens now, that's available to us now. Not by believing the right things so that we go to the good place when we die, but rather the kind of life we're going to live now. And that investing in the life that we live now is how we leave a legacy.
Yeah.
It's how we create something that passes on beyond us in what we invest in other people and what we invest in the world around us,
right.
of our time and our energy. And they may seem like very small things,
Yeah, it may be something that nobody ever knows about. It's not going to be something very likely that gets our name on a building, right?
Right.
But it's no less real and no less meaningful.
Right, absolutely. And in fact, in some ways it's more meaningful because I think it's all those little things that we do, to live a life of faithfulness as best we know how, that really make the difference in our world.
I think that's a very biblical idea, Kevin, because the Bible talks about eternal life as something we experience here and now. I think of what Jesus says in his high priestly prayer for his disciples in the Gospel of John, the 17th chapter. He says, eternal life is that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. So when we are in relationship with Jesus now, our eternal life has begun in this world. Right.
Yes. And that there's something about an existence that goes on beyond us that I think is very true and is very much a part of how we exist, whether it's existing in memory, as we have talked about before on the episode on the show recently, existing in people's memory, or existing, in the presence of God, whatever it is, and however you view that. I think that there is such, I guess for me, there's such doctrinal differences, regarding the what and the where and the how and the who of what happens after we die, that I'm really interested in what happens while we're alive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really interested less on the there and then and more on the here and now. And we're just coming off Christmas, so I've still got Christmas ringing in my rattling around in my brain, and it reminds me of a piece from a Christmas Carol that where Marley is talking about Scrooge's what Scrooge has done and what he's wrought in his life, and the big tragedy of Scrooge is that nobody remembers him.
Yeah.
For anything good, or really is that bother that he died, and they're kind of maybe happy that he died,
Right.
The thing about Scrooge is his loneliness, that he's isolated and he's alone, and that he's spent his life sort of hoarding everything, and not sharing and not giving. And by not sharing and not giving, he's made himself alone, and he hasn't left a legacy. The only legacy that he has is the money that he leaves behind. That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
We look at the way he accounts Marley's death. Earlier in the story, and he says,
it should be said, of course, and maybe you're about to. Sorry if I'm stealing your thunder.
No.
That this is a future that does not ultimately come to pass for Scrooge, right? He's
if you want to spoil the story, sir.
Oh, well. Okay, sorry. Sound the spoiler horn when you mention A Christmas Carol.
It's only, 200 years old.
Right? It's only something like 200 years old, right?
right. Did you know that Jesus returns at the end of the Bible? Anyway.
What?
I know, sorry. Just dropping the spoilers everywhere. Well, yeah, you're right. And
I think it's important, yeah.
Right, and it's because the spirits of the Christmas, they give him a vision of his past, his present, and his future, and that they are all connected, and that they all have this eternal echo. And it's not just about what he carries on into the afterlife, which is chains and locks and safes and things that are weighing him down, weighing his soul down, but his legacy, his inheritance of what he gave out into the world is also nothing. There's also nothing he leaves behind him, but sharing his own hurt with other people. And Marley says of him that any Christian spirit working kindly in his little sphere, whatever it may be, will find his mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Saying to him, I've squandered what I had, by trying to hoard what I thought was important. Mm-hmm. And I think Christians can do that. Jesus talks about storing up treasure in heaven, right? And I don't think that has to do with doing good deeds so that you get a star in your crown and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
It's sort of like cashing your receipts when you die. I think it has more to do that don't treasure the stuff you can accumulate here, right? But rather give it away, be generous with it, and be generous with your life. But the idea being that I was thinking of what Marley says there was that no matter who you are or what you're doing, if you are working kindly in your little sphere, right, whatever it may be, if you are enacting those things that, those high-minded ideals, as we talk about in Star Trek,
right.
If you're enacting that and investing in the lives of others, that's where you're going to find your vast means of usefulness, and that you can neglect that during your life, or you can invest in it.
I love how you're going back to this 200-year-old text that we've spoiled and applying it to us today, because I think Star Trek gives us some examples of how to do that we can profit from. We talked in our episode review of how it brings these legacy characters into the Prodigy context,
right?
And is taking old dialogue out of context, and as we talked about, sometimes maybe more successfully than others.
Right.
But it made me think of how Scripture does the same thing. That as the people of God, we have this enormous story and history behind us, and this legacy of revelation, of wisdom, of law, of gospel, the message of the gospel, of the letters. We have this immense record of God's story and God's history with us, and even between the two covers of the Bible, which is, as we've talked about, an anthology, essentially.
Right.
We see faithful people using their God-given talent and imagination, and many Christians believe guided by the Spirit directly, to bring those treasures forth from their past into their present. I mean, it's all past for us, right? The Bible's, the canon is closed. But, we see faithful people reaching back to the Psalms and the prophets and the law, and especially in the New Testament, we see believers in Jesus looking back and finding new levels of meaning, new layers of meaning that may or may not have been apparent to those to whom the words were first spoken or for whom the words were first written. Was this particular verse always seen as a messianic prophecy? Well, maybe not. But we do know New Testament writers saw it that way. And so it becomes meaningful to us. Meaning accrues to those things. Kind of the same way that in Prodigy, I think at least, a new meaning to that speech from Enemy Within accrued when Spock's giving it to Dal. So we take these treasures from our past, and we reinterpret them and recontextualize them, guided by the Spirit, guided by our faithful imaginations and our faithful desire to discern God's will. Because that was going to be my point, was that it's not just doing it for the sake of doing it. It's not just doing it to be cool. I don't think even Prodigy is doing it with Star Trek quotes just to be cool. I think they're trying to construct an argument about Dal's character. And we do it as Christians, not just because we can or because it's fun or whatever, but because we believe that's one way we discern God's will. That's one way we see how God wants us to invest in our lives here and now, by remembering how the people of God have invested in their lives then and there, right? And so that helps us build our legacy. That helps us do those small but faithful and important things by bringing the legacy that's in Scripture into our present today.
Right. Yeah. No, it's really true, and it's very important, and it does resonate in Star Trek. You know, we were talking in the news section about this exhibit about Jewish themes in Star Trek, or how
Right.
Jewish philosophy, Jewish thought has influenced Star Trek, Jewish traditions, and Jewish worldview, and I find that really interesting because, and particularly within the character of Spock,
Yeah.
because there's very much a sense with him. We think about when he passes his katra on to McCoy in Star Trek 2, he uses that word remember.
Yes.
And
Yes.
remembrance is such a very important,
Yeah.
very important theme. I talk in the book, I think, about the idea of God remembering God's people,
Yes.
and that it's not a remembering in that God forgot,
Right.
but it's acting again on their behalf. It's recalling, and it's connecting back to that thread of relationship and
Yes.
keeping it going, right?
Yes.
And it's the same sort of thing in communion. Remembering
Yes.
Jesus is also taking the parts and pieces that are all of us, and instead of dismembering, taking apart, remembering, bringing members together as one body.
Yes, the body of Christ around that table, where the body of Christ is there in the bread, depending on how your tradition views it, and that command, "Do this in remembrance of me," is not just, I believe, think about me as I was 2,000 years ago. It's experience my presence among you and within you in that current moment. So yes, yeah, Eucharist is a very powerful example of the place of memory in our Christian legacy.
Right, absolutely. And I think that sense of legacy is very strong in Star Trek at this point. At this point in Star Trek's history, I think we're doing more and more to look back at where we've come from, and we've done it throughout. You can look back at at the 25th, around the 25th anniversary.
Yep.
No, not the 25th, the 30th anniversary was when they did all of these episodes like Trials and Tribulations on Deep Space Nine.
Oh, right,
and
right.
An episode that went back to see Sulu's
flashback on Voyager.
Flashback on Voyager, right? And these sort of that it can be sort of self-referential in that way, and I think even of how older Spock influences younger Spock.
Yes.
In the new Kelvin timeline films.
Yeah.
Particularly in the first and the third ones.
Yeah.
Because Spock has something to pass on to his younger self, where he says, I didn't tell you what was going on. I kept this from Kirk because you needed each other. You needed to discover your friendship. You needed to know what you could accomplish together, and you couldn't do that except experientially. And so I had to let you have that instead of giving you that information. But then on the other hand, he also says to his younger self, he gives himself advice. And he says, in this situation, put aside logic, do what feels right.
Yeah.
And gosh, how many times have we wished we could say things to our younger selves?
Oh,
and of course
No
we
kidding.
can't. Of course we can't. But think about the way that we hear those words and the way young Spock receives those words. Do we receive the words of those who've gone before us, with that kind of weight? And do we recognize that when people who've been where we are say things to us, they are often saying to us what they wish they would have said to their younger selves.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a heritage and there's a legacy that we carry on. Yes, by carrying on what's gone before. That's why Prodigy is so cool. We want our kids to get involved in Star Trek, because it means something to us.
Mm-hmm.
And we want them to participate in that. We want them to hear the songs that we heard when we were younger. We want them to see the TV shows we saw, read the books that we read, to help them understand the things that formed us and the things that shaped us. That's why we hand those things down.
No, yeah, I agree, and I was going to add, and we don't do it uncritically either. Like, there are some shows I watched and stories I read and songs I listened to that I don't really care or want my kids
Right.
to pass on. But that again, that's part of that discernment is bringing forth what's good and what we found valuable. And for us, for sure, Star Trek qualifies. And but yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I think I think the process of Star Trek, as we've seen it, there have been so many times when people say, "Oh, this person ruined Star Trek," or "Star Trek's gone so far away." It's Deep Space Nine, or it's the Kelvin timeline, or it's Rick Berman, or it's whatever it is, or it's Alex Kurtzman, or whoever the latest enemy is, right? About how terrible they've done it, how they don't understand Star Trek and whatever. Yet at every turn, I think the people who have leveled those accusations, it's understandable. But for the most part, I think we're very blessed in that hasn't really been the case. And that actually what we see happening is very much what we see happening in family traditions, what we see happening in church traditions, which is that new people come along and interpret the same ideas in new ways. As was talked about in this episode of Prodigy, that it's not just translation; it's interpretation.
Right.
I mean that's true when it comes to Scripture.
Yes,
we have to think not just. I mean, you can learn the Greek and the Hebrew and learn what the words. You can't see my air quotes. What the words mean, right? But the best way to do that is to understand what different concepts they conveyed at the time. But that doesn't mean that you can't also derive new truths that weren't intended by the authors from the words that you read. And that's okay too. And there's so much there are always new things that happen. There are always heretics. But usually they are they're listening to the same music.
Yeah.
They're just inventing new dance moves.
Yeah. I mean, that's what makes a tradition living instead of ossified. It's not saying, the Star Trek I knew when I was a teenager is the only true Star Trek. So there. Right. It's saying that Star Trek was really formative to me, as you said. That was really important to me. And even if I maybe don't like especially what somebody else is doing with it now, I'm going to respect it as they are. I love that phrase you use, listening to the same music. They're drawing from the same source material. And I think that's true in the church as well when, it's a famous saying around church circles anyway that I've been in. The 7 last words of the church are, "But we've always done it that way." And the Spirit is freer than that, and God's not threatened by new ideas, new interpretations, new attempts. I mean, I went to this immersive Van Gogh exhibit a little while ago with my family, and one of the quotes of his that really struck me, that they had displayed all in big letters on the wall, swirling around you. It was very impressive, but it was something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing, of how sad would life be if we never dared to try anything.
Yeah.
And I think God, it's not a case of anything goes, but God has given us large boundaries within which to try all kinds of things.
Right.
In terms of faithful living, in terms of, as you said at the beginning of this discussion, investing in our life here and now, investing in the people around us. I don't believe the faith is dependent upon us. I believe in God's grace and God's sovereignty, but I do think the expression of faith on earth, that doesn't happen if we just sit around waiting for God to do everything.
Right.
That's another sure way for the legacy to shrivel up and die. So,
right. And this is all reminding me of you talk about the tradition ossifying, reminds me of the Return of the Archons.
Yes.
Because it's this thing that is mechanistically trying to hang desperately on to the rigid way of doing things.
Right.
And we think that in the rigid way of doing things, that's how we're going to connect to the thing that we've lost that we're trying to carry on.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that's what kills the soul. That's what kills the spirit. Part of the reason for that is that we're created in the image of our Creator and therefore created to create, to be creative. And so we've got to do things in new ways. But that's always the challenge of carrying these things on, carrying these legacies on, is taking these things that have meant a lot to people before us and understanding them in a new way, in a way that preserves them and yet makes them new at the same time. That's what I hope we've been doing with the Advent series on this show, for sure. Yeah. Taking the tradition of Advent, and making it new, because it's helpful and because it's good, and finding ways for our souls to flourish and not to be tied down in those ways is very, very important. One of my favorite songs is called "Bird of Heaven" by my favorite band, Iona. Go look it up. I could quote the entirety of the lyrics here, but I won't do it. But the idea of the song is simply that the spirit is the bird of heaven, which is symbolized in Celtic symbology as the wild goose, and that you can try to catch that bird. You can try to lock it in a cage, You can try to lock it in religion. You can try to lock it in, certain ways of doing things. But if you look again at the cage, the bird will be gone, because the bird's going to fly on with or without you. And so like the idea is that you have to not catch the bird of heaven, I would say, but rather follow where it's flying.
I like that. And it makes me think of a Star Trek connection, actually.
Yes, please.
Among fans, the Great Bird of the Galaxy is Gene Roddenberry's nickname.
Oh, indeed.
But of course, that originated as an in-universe reference to something in an episode. And maybe Sulu just said it jokingly.
He did.
But maybe he really meant it, too. When Janice Rand brings him food in the botany lab, he says, "Oh, may the great bird of the galaxy roost on your planet." But isn't it interesting? And it's just a coincidence,
right?
Maybe, but there's this apparently semi-divine image out there in the Star Trek universe of some source of goodness and blessing and joy that people wish upon one another. Oh, may the great bird of the galaxy, I'd like to think that's the case anyway. I mean, it's a throwaway line, but right. I think there's maybe God is having a little fun with that line too.
Maybe the great bird of the galaxy isn't Gene Roddenberry. Maybe it's the wild goose of the Holy Spirit.
The wild goose of the Holy Spirit. Yes.
I like that. I'll see if I can gank that for the next book.
The spirit moves where the spirit wills.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Why not?
That's right. But I just feel like, it's great for us in Star Trek to reach back and to connect back. But one of the great things that Star Trek has done, and I think one of the great things it illustrates for us, is letting the ideas breathe. I've told the story told the story on the show before about Rick Berman having a bust of Gene Roddenberry on his desk, little bust, it's like 4 inches tall. They were working on a particular episode, and they were struggling over this because they knew they could all Gene had recently passed, and fairly recently. I don't know exactly how recently. It wasn't like yesterday or something, but the Gene's presence was looming in the room. Everybody knew that he had very strict ideas about what you can and can't do in Star Trek.
Yeah, he did.
And he kind of painted the borders at times a little too strongly for his writers.
Yeah.
And they were really contending with this kind of what would Gene do, sort of moment. And the things that they really wanted to do, they knew he wouldn't approve of. And Rick tells a story that he had this little piece of ribbon in his pocket, and he pulled it out and he wrapped it around the eyes of the Gene Roddenberry bust as a little blindfold. And he said, and that stayed there for the rest of production, the rest of Star Trek production. And the idea was Gene's here, but he doesn't have to see everything that's going on. But I like that because it's like we want to. There were always, and I could tell stories, but there are ways where Gene's ideas of how to carry on his own ideas actually ended up undoing his own ideas. The way the kids were wanting to do it was closer to what he was actually preaching than what he was telling them to do.
Right. And isn't it great that God doesn't expect or want us to, metaphorically speaking, put a blindfold around God's eyes as though we could, that God gives us that space gives us that space to breathe, you know.
Right, but I would say the people we're putting the blindfold on is maybe the people in our prior church tradition. Maybe,
well, sometimes
it might be our parents. It might be whoever we think has put down rules that we're going to be bending or breaking, because there's a higher rule, there's a higher authority that we're trying to serve. There's something greater that we're trying to get to. And so I like that idea. I think that's so great in Star Trek. I think it's great having lots of different kinds of Star Trek that are happening right now at the same time, so that we can see, especially on a show like this, that they're all involved in the same project. And they do it in different ways. And like you're saying earlier, at the Star Trek that I grew up on as a teenager isn't, the Star Trek for all people, for all places, for all time. It might be for me. That might be where I stop liking Star Trek. Nothing else matters if it doesn't have Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in it or whatever. And that's fine, but there is value to everything that's been going on since, and that's a beautiful gift.
And I think it's certainly true in fandom, and I think it's true in the life of faith as well, that if you only stick with what you've always known, you can. You've got the freedom to do that too, if that's how you breathe. But but you can't. You don't really. Ultimately, other people are breathing a lot more and enjoying a lot more and gaining a lot more than than only sticking within those rules or whatever's under that blindfold.
Right. Well, I think Starfleet is formed to seek out new life. And I think that call to seek out new life, I don't think that's just a Star Trek thing.
Absolutely.
I think that's sacred.
Yeah.
I think it's essential to our calling as human beings, and I think it's essential to our calling as Christians. I quote all the time at the closing of each of these episodes. I say, as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. And I know that the verse John 10:10 has been used by prosperity teachers and stuff, and in some not cool ways. I get that, but it's the words of Jesus where he says, "I have come that you may have life, live long, and have it more abundantly." Prosper. And I think that is the calling to seek out new life. Not that it's going to drop on you from the heavens, but that it's there for you to find if you will open your eyes to it, if you will have ears to hear that music's playing, and you can find your own way to incorporate that into your life. And it's there. So the search for the search for new life. I mean, again, back to Advent. I keep doing this, but back to the Advent series. That search for new life. Every Advent episode, I say, we're here to seek out new life in the advent of Christ, because that's what it is. New life doesn't just mean the life we have after we die, or the life we have at the end of all things when God gets what God wants and shalom reigns. But the new life that we can have every day, Paul tells us to renew our minds, and to be transformed by that renewing. But that's not a one-time salvation experience thing.
Right.
That's an everyday, ongoing process. Goes back to that old saying, I have been saved, I am being saved, I will be saved. That it's not just one moment of salvation, that salvation is already wrought for us, that it works out in our lives, and that we can trust that it will culminate because God gets what God wants. It is all together. And that's what legacy for me means. That's what we pass on to one another. We take those things that are meaningful to us and we pass them on, not that they can be rigidly held to exactly the way we pass them on, but that they may flourish and be life-giving. And we only do that, I think, by investing honestly in the world in which we live, in the people who are around us, not by being so heavenly minded that we're no earthly good, but being so earthly minded that we do heavenly good.
Yeah.
Earthly minded in the sense of being invested in the here and now.
Right.
Invested in where we are and what we're doing. So that's where I came around to calling this episode That Which Survives, which of course is an original series episode that we did not mention a whit about.
And that's okay, because it's not one I've passed on to anybody.
Not a great episode. Let's just be honest. It's a bit. I was watching part of that the other day. I was like, yeah, oh boy.
I will say though, I think it's the first one I ever saw any Star Trek. I was up sick late one night, and it was in reruns, and it was on late night TV. And the thing that I was in grade school, and I didn't become a fan the next day or whatever. But the thing that struck me was I thought the monitors above the science station were windows, and they were talking about going at warp whatever, and the stars were still, and I thought that was funny. But I'm pretty sure that was the very first Star Trek I ever saw. It didn't make an impression, but except for that little bit.
That's great.
But,
that's amazing. I'm glad you remember that. But but just in choosing that episode, you pointed out to me that just in choosing that as our episode title, even though we didn't plan to talk about that episode,
right,
is part of the way that we can take from what has come before us. Is kind of an example. That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's you talk about scripture jazz in your book. Prodigy did this thing with kind of Star Trek jazz with this episode.
Right.
And we're doing a little bit here of our own tonight, but that, we take, I guess the image that's keeps coming to my mind and I keep shying away from it, but it's the verse that I've only now realized is what Jesus says in Matthew 13:52. He says, "Every scribe trained for the kingdom of heaven is like a householder who brings out of his treasure things new and old." So it's hanging on to that which survives, again, not just to keep it some ossified relic like you'd find in a museum, but to bring it forth for continued use and bringing forth other things that are new. And that's this process I think you've been describing tonight of investing in ourselves, those around us, our world in godly ways.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's beautiful. But I also want to say, as a writer, and I know you are too, I don't think he's just talking about being a scribe,
right?
A person who writes.
No, yeah.
I think of the quotation from Picard. The past has already been written, but the future is ours to write. It's not just writing you might do on a page, although that might be part of it. But it's the future that you're going to write with your life, with how you live it and what you do and who you invest in. And the concept, too, that that idea of bringing forth things that are new and old. I have a saying that I use a lot that my son has picked up that we got from Mr. Rogers, which is you learn something old every day. And,
I like that.
I think it's a lot better than you learn something new every day. Might be new to you, but most things you learn are actually old.
I like that.
And so when we're talking about bringing old things, it's important what old things we decide to bring.
Yeah.
And you can bring old mistakes, and you can bring old failings, and you can bring old hurts, and you can beat yourself up with them. You can squeeze them really tight. You can squeeze tight good things and hold them to yourself. Whatever it may be, you can sort of Scroogify yourself very easily by both beating yourself with the past and also clinging to it in an unhealthy way, but bringing forth those things with a spirit of generosity, with a spirit that you're going to share the good things that you have and focus on the good of the good things that you have, and focus on the ways that the heartaches and the trials and the hardships that you've been through can encourage both you and others to live a better, more full life. That's seeking out life, and that's writing a future, and it may seem a small thing, just to give kindness to other people in your everyday life, but that's part of your legacy. That's part of who you are and how you are remembered. Maybe after you die, maybe just the day after you left that person's presence. But thinking about how you're remembered and thinking about that legacy that you leave, and recognizing that the legacy you inherit can feel very, very much bigger than anything you're ever going to leave behind. But you have no control over the size of what you leave behind. You only have control of what you do with what you have. Yeah. And so be faithful. Work kindly in your little sphere, as Marley says in the Christmas Carol. And you will find that there's your life will have plenty of places to put good into the world. You can do it, and that's a legacy worth leaving.
Amen. That's
a really great discussion. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I know I did. we're going to get into what is normally our audience question section. We've tried to kind of open it up and call it our audience feedback section, because we want to hear, your thoughts, ideas, questions, comments, hints, allegations, and things left unsaid, not just your questions. And so we're gonna do that next.
So our feedback is a comment a listener sent in, I think maybe in response to our review of the last episode of Discovery. Mm-hmm. This listener says, I sympathize with the longing to go to a parallel universe, and I would do so if I could. And I tell you, there are days when I'm right with that listener.
Yeah.
I mean, if I could go to, as I think I've said before, if I could go to the Star Trek universe.
Yeah.
And what if it's good days, not during the Dominion War or something.
Right.
Then for sure I would beam over in a heartbeat. But
right.
How about you, Kevin? Would you get away from it all in a parallel universe if you could?
It would be interesting. I mean, the whole idea, if parallel universes exist, of course, you'd have to have control over being able to get back,
Would you? You wouldn't want a one-way trip?
No, I don't think I want a one-way trip. I'm pretty invested here.
Okay, fair enough.
I feel like if I just kind of transitioned over to a parallel universe and just kind of lived there, I'd feel like I was neglecting everything that I was meant to do in this universe. Of course, it depends on how you view the will of God. I mean, my concept, I talked about it in the original crew book, in the bit on the 2009 film. I talked about the fact that if all of these parallel universes exist, then God must be sovereign in all of them.
Yeah.
And that if all these infinite possibilities are real and they all happen in some plane, then no matter what happens, God gets what God wants. As I say all the time on the show, that God is not thwarted by even our worst mistakes. And that's a very comforting thought for me. That's a very reassuring thought for me.
No, it is. It is.
So,
but I think your point's well taken, that God does not call us to a faith that encourages us to leave the world behind before our time.
Right.
There is, yes. And I'm thinking of even like the Narnia books where Aslan tells the children, you've been brought here only so you may know me better in the world from which you came.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. And I think if God wanted to do something like that with me, I'd be perfectly happy. That would be fine. I'd live in a little science fiction episode for a little while. That would be cool. And yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what other possibilities exist out there. But to live and to know in that knowledge that, wherever you go and whatever happens, that God is sovereign in that reality too. That could be very instructive and very interesting.
I guess the other thought that occurs to me, though, thinking about parallel universes in Star Trek, is be careful what you wish for. I'm thinking of the episode Parallels in TNG, where Worf comes back from the Batleth tournament and then starts shifting among. And there's one universe where the Borg have just about destroyed all civilization, and Riker's, the bridge around Riker is in flames, and he's screaming, "No, you've got to help us! Don't send us back!"
Right?
Like that's one parallel universe I'd want to steer clear from if I could.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
But God is sovereign there too.
Yes. I mean, it's a horrible time, but there have been horrible times in human history already, and there will be again. So,
that's right. And we see God in the scriptures bringing good out of horrible times.
That's right.
Certainly the Babylonian exile was a horrible time for the Jewish people. Mm-hmm. The crucifixion of Jesus, a horrible thing, but so obviously, yes, God's sovereignty brings good out of horrible times. But I'd rather not be on the flaming bridge of a starship the Borg are attacking. If I have anything to say about it,
I agree with you.
If God asks my opinion.
Well, that's the thing about the question. If you leave it that open-ended, go to a parallel universe? Depends on which one,
Right.
And even if you went to a parallel universe where everything was perfect and great, it would need to be perfect and great in a way that still offered challenge. We've talked about that too, that like This Side of Paradise in the original series, that, if everything's perfect because nothing ever goes wrong or nothing ever happens, or you can't, you don't have any agency, you're just sort of floating and existing. That's not a living, that's not life, and
right.
So any universe that would encourage stagnation would not be good either. So, I think I like the one we're in. I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, the open-endedness of it makes me think of a Stephen Sondheim song from Into the Woods. Part of the lyrics are, running away, let's do it, free from the ties that bind, no more despair or burdens to bear out there in the yonder. Running away, go to it. Where did you have in mind? Have to take care. Unless there's a where, you'll only be wandering blind. Just more questions, different kind. I think, that's this idea that we often think, and I'm not saying this is true of the listener, but I often think, it would be better if things were different, this way or that way or the other. But we carry all our stuff with us, even I suspect to parallel universes, and there are challenges everywhere, good and bad challenges, and sometimes they're the same, right?
Right.
But yeah, so I was just, the open-endedness of the comment made me think of that song, and it as only Sondheim can. It's so winsomely cautionary nature.
Yes. Well, and it's unless there's a where,
Yeah,
that idea. We talk about a lot about this in philosophical terms. Teleology, that is the telos, the goal, the aim, where we're going.
Right.
As Martin Luther King Jr. said, there's an arc to history, and it bends toward justice. And making that arc bend, helping it along the way.
It doesn't bend on its own.
It doesn't bend on its own. It bends because God is at work in human history.
Yeah.
And if we are alive to that and open to that, then we can be a part of it. And it's interesting, you read from Sondheim, whom we've recently lost.
Yeah.
And in this episode that we talk about legacy, I mean, there's something that somebody
there's
wrote.
a legacy.
Yeah, there's something that somebody wrote for a musical theater piece, which a lot of people might think was fluff, but that's why his work endures, because he put himself into it, and things that matter and things that mean something, and tell a story that touch people's hearts, and that's important.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad we're doing this audience feedback as opposed to it always being a question, because we want to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
And so people don't always have to ask a question. They have things they want to say, and I hope they'll continue to send them in as this listener did, and keep that conversation going.
Yes, absolutely. We love to hear from you, and we enjoy engaging with you, and it just means the world to us to hear from you what the show means to you, and even if you disagree with us, we like hearing that too.
See, we're not bound by what we've always done. We've always done audience questions, but now we're
doing audience feedback.
We're spreading our wings like the wild goose or the great bird of the galaxy and flying to something new. And I love it.
That's good.
I love it.
That's good. Anyway. Well, Mike, this has been a good conversation. I really appreciate you having it with me.
I appreciate being here. Thank you for having me.
It's been great. Well, you're part of the show.
But I still thank you for having me as part of the show.
Okay, well, good. So what do we got coming up next week?
Well, among many interesting Star Trek topics, I'm sure, we'll be discussing the next episode of Star Trek Prodigy, Season 1, Episode 7. So I'm looking forward to that. And we don't know the title. That's crazy. No, we don't. We were in that cloud of unknowing. Yeah, we'll have to see. The fog of unknowing at the top of the mountain of entertainment. But we have faith. Are we really at the top, though? I mean, well, no. You and me, no. This podcast, no. Yeah. We are not at the top. Star Trek is at the top of the mountain of entertainment. I think Star Trek is most of the mountain of entertainment, I agree. To be honest. I mean, I know they've got lots of stuff on there, and I keep seeing ads when I watch Prodigy for things like the Paw Patrol movie, but I have not been tempted by that. Well, I want to see the Paw Patrol movie. Anyway. Do you? Okay, yeah, well, to each their own. When my daughter and I think I mentioned last week, my daughter's 14, so she's a little bit too old for the commercials during Star Trek Prodigy. And I said, okay, well, I have the commercials because that's the basic plan and it's easy on the budget. But let me see how much it would cost to go to the premiere level of Paramount Plus. And it would be twice the price. So I said, sorry, kid, we're going to watch the commercials during Star Trek Prodigy. I understand. I definitely understand.
All right, well, I'm excited about next week, and I hope everybody will join us. In the meantime, please like and subscribe, comment and share, and if you like what you're hearing, please write a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Your reviews help more people find out about the show and let us know how we're doing. Also, send us your feedback. You can find us at Gospel Trek Pod on both Twitter and Instagram, and Gospel According to Star Trek on Facebook, or you can email us at gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to discuss your thoughts and questions on the show.
Also, you can support the show by using the support button on anchor.fm/GATST or by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/gospeltrekpodcast. You can support the show, help us make good content, and also get some cool perks.
And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And until next time,
I'm Mike Poteet.
And I'm Kevin Sinise. And as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper. See you next time.